Lovett grew up in a quiet, isolated home in a town close to Lagos. Her parents, though loving, were overly protective. They homeschooled her, keeping her inside for most of her childhood. The walls of their small house seemed to close in on her as she listened to her parents' cryptic warnings. "Be careful, Lovett," her mother would say, "pregnancy is dangerous. Don't let anyone deceive you. Just a touch from a boy will get you pregnant." These warnings filled Lovett with confusion and fear, leaving her with a sense of dread and suspicion about the world outside. Her only friend was books, stories about nature, and mysterious characters who lived lives unlike her own. Her mother's constant presence kept her from experiencing the joys of childhood freedom, but Lovett secretly longed for more. Lovett's father, a strict man who rarely smiled, spoke in hushed tones with her mother, discussing things Lovett didn't understand. His strict face, often grim, served as a reminder of the world's dangers that lurked just beyond their home. Despite her curiosity, Lovett's life was controlled by rigid rules: no going outside without permission, no friends allowed over, and most notably, no talking about boys or relationships. Her questions were always met with shallow answers that left her with more questions than answers. But the more her parents warned her, the more her curiosity grew about the things they tried to keep hidden. As Lovett grew older, her sense of isolation deepened. The few children she saw in the town played outside, their laughter echoing in the distance, but Lovett could only watch them from her window, a silent observer to a life she could never be a part of. She became obsessed with finding a way out of her sheltered world. Books became her escape, and each story filled her with more questions about life, relationships, and the world beyond the walls of her home. Her curiosity led her to sneak peeks at the outside world whenever she could. She'd watch other children going to school, boys and girls talking and laughing together, and longed to be a part of it. Lovett imagined what it would be like to walk among them, to have friends, to live a life that didn't feel so controlled. But every time she shared her thoughts with her parents, they'd remind her that the outside world was full of dangers, and that school would only bring more temptation and distractions. Still, her heart yearned for the unknown, and she began questioning the validity of her parents' warnings. At the age of 16, Lovett's world shifted dramatically. Her parents, despite their reservations, sent her to a boarding school in Lagos, a move that Lovett had secretly hoped for. Though she was excited, she also felt a deep sense of anxiety. Leaving the comfort of her home was both a liberation and a terrifying unknown. The first few days were a war of emotions, from overwhelming shyness to the joy of meeting new people. Lovett struggled to fit in, unsure of how to make friends or navigate the social world she had never known. Stepping down from the bus with her parents and walking to the principal's office, the students at the school were different from the children she had seen in the village. They laughed, talked freely, and shared experiences that were completely foreign to Lovett. She felt like an outsider. After the registration was done, her parents reminded her again to stay away from boys and bade her goodbye. Walking to her hostel to prepare for tomorrow's class, she longed to fit in but was unsure how to do so. The only thing that seemed to make her feel more comfortable was her studies. Academics were a familiar territory. But even within her thoughts, she felt the weight of her parents' cryptic warnings. She couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was waiting for her outside the safety of the classroom. The next day in the class, the teacher taught them human reproduction in biology as the last subject of the day. This was Lovett's first time hearing about it, and it was strange to her because she wasn't taught anything like that at home. After the lesson, she raised up her hands to clarify her confusion, but her teacher asked them to take it as an assignment that she would explain better tomorrow. This left Lovett so devastated, she decided to go to the library to soak herself up in this knowledge. While walking alone to the library, Lovett met a boy from her hometown. He usually visits their home with his parents, and Lovett waves him through the window. He was charming, confident, and seemed genuinely interested in her. They started talking, and he spoke of life, of love, and even of things she had only read about in books. He was everything Lovett had been taught to avoid, but his attentiveness made her feel seen and heard in ways she never had before. Lovett told him about the struggle she had in biology in her first day in school. He knew she was isolated for years and seemed to understand her better than anyone else. Their conversation soon went into another route as the boy, who went by the name Chijioke, offered to teach Lovett about biology, something she had only wanted to study in textbooks in the library. He told her to meet him in the school's restroom because it's a practical session. When she got there, what seemed like a harmless lesson turned into something far more intimate. Lovett, with her limited understanding of relationships, found herself caught in a situation she didn't fully comprehend. Chijioke kept touching different parts of her sensitive body to explain to her how reproduction works, and before she knew it her skirt was off her waist. She was feeling too pleased to stop him from touching her. Chijioke laid her on the floor and did the unthinkable to Lovett in the bathroom. At first she was all pain trying to push him off, but soon pleasure covered up all her pains. When the act was over, Chijioke's charming demeanor shifted into one of distance. Lovett felt confused and violated, unable to process what had just happened. She returned to her room, feeling a deep sense of guilt and confusion, but the boy's smile and the pleasure she felt made her happy and wanting more in her thoughts. She couldn't help but remember the warnings from her parents. Before she slept that night, she felt if pregnancy was gotten by mere touch she would have been pregnant anytime she hugged her dad. So she concluded that her parents lied to her and she will find out how one gets pregnant soon, but for now she just wants to keep enjoying what she had with Chijioke in the school bathroom. The next day was an interesting one for her in school. She learned a lot and listened carefully. After the day's school activities, she tried to reach Chijioke so he could touch her the way he did yesterday, but she couldn't find him because he was avoiding her. This continued for 2 weeks. She felt bad and wanted more, but she decided to enjoy the environment and all it has for her. 3 weeks after her encounter with Chijioke were filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. Lovett could not ignore the feeling that something was wrong with her body, something she could not yet name. She felt nauseous, a strange discomfort settling in her body. She tried to push it away, telling herself it was just a stomach bug or stress from the new environment. But when her period failed to come, the realization hit her like a wave. She was pregnant. The same fear she had been taught all her life was now her reality. She tried to deny it at first, going over every detail of the past few weeks, hoping it wasn't true. But the signs were undeniable. Panic set in. How could this have happened? How could she let it happen? Lovett's mind raced with questions. What would she do now? She knew she couldn't go back to her parents, the shame was too great. Her world, which had felt so safe just a few weeks ago, now seemed like a cage. She cried herself to sleep, wondering how she would survive the consequences of her actions. The boy, once so charming, had disappeared from her life just as quickly as he had entered it. Lovett felt alone, trapped in a situation she didn't know how to handle. Desperation led Lovett to search for someone who could help her. She confided in one of her teachers, Mrs. Elle, whom she had grown close to. The teacher listened carefully and, after a long conversation, promised to guide Lovett through her options. Mrs. Elle explained that there were places she could go for support, but Lovett still feared her parents' wrath. It was hard for her to imagine telling them, especially her father, whose strict warnings had always been a constant presence in her life. As Lovett navigated her options, she also came with the idea of confronting Chijioke. When she finally found him, he was distant and uninterested. Lovett demanded to know why he had abandoned her, but his response was cold and evasive. He didn't seem to care about the consequences of his actions. She realized that the boy she had trusted was nothing more than a liar, a predator who had manipulated her for his own gain. Her sense of betrayal deepened as she considered how he had used her naivety for his own pleasure. The confrontation left Lovett with a deep sense of loss, not just for the boy, but for the innocence she had lost. She was no longer the same girl who had arrived at the school just weeks ago. Now, she was someone else, a young woman facing an uncertain future with no clear path ahead. Soon rumors began as whispers in the school, faint and scattered, but they soon grew louder, echoing through the school corridors. Lovett noticed the way her classmates avoided her gaze or exchanged knowing looks when she passed by. The shame was suffocating. She had no one to confide in, as even those she had considered friends distanced themselves. "Did you hear about her?" some girls would giggle, their voices dripping with judgment. Lovett kept her head down, her growing belly becoming harder to hide as the weeks passed. The physical changes brought another layer of discomfort. Morning sickness made attending classes a struggle, and the weight of carrying a child sapped her energy. Teachers, though some were sympathetic, treated her differently, often overlooking her struggles or offering veiled comments about choices and responsibility. Lovett's once bright academic future now felt like a distant dream. She clung to Mrs. Adelaide's support, the only source of kindness she could find. The teacher encouraged her to focus on her studies, reminding her that education would be her way out of this situation. But even with that advice, Lovett felt trapped between her growing responsibilities and the relentless judgment of her peers. The school administration held meetings to decide whether Lovett should be allowed to stay. They asked how she got pregnant. Lovett told them that Chijioke had sex with her on the first day of school, but Chijioke denied everything with evidence. When Chijioke denied of having anything to do with Lovett, the principal almost threw her out of the school because students are not supposed to learn with pregnancy, especially a loosed one at that. But with Mrs. Adelik's plea and intervention, they decided to let her continue, but the stigma only grew. Balancing her studies with pregnancy proved to be an uphill battle. Concentrating in class became nearly impossible as her body ached and her mind raced with thoughts of the future. The fear of failing her exams haunted her. She knew that her education was her best chance at building a life for herself and her child, but the challenges seemed insurmountable. Some teachers, like Mrs. Adelik, offered additional tutoring and encouraged her to keep pushing forward. However, others were less understanding, treating her pregnancy as a moral failing rather than a hurdle to overcome. Despite everything, Lovett found peace in the idea of proving everyone wrong. She began studying late into the night, determined to pass her exams. She also joined an online small support group for young mothers, which Mrs. Adelik had introduced her to. There, she met other girls who had faced similar struggles, and their stories gave her the strength to keep going. This whole journey happened without the school informing her parents. Lovett would go to Mrs. Adelik's house during holidays and convince her parents that she is trying to learn all that she missed. The day of the delivery came sooner than Lovett had anticipated. She was rushed to a nearby clinic, her heart pounding with fear and uncertainty. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, but she held on, knowing that this moment would change her life forever. Hours later, her cries turned into the cries of a newborn, a baby girl. As Lovett held her daughter for the first time, a mixture of emotions overwhelmed her: love, fear, and an unshakable sense of responsibility. The weeks following the birth were filled with challenges. Lovett struggled to adjust to motherhood while managing her schoolwork. Sleep became a luxury, as the baby's cries often kept her up at night. The financial burden of raising a child began to weigh heavily on her, and she wondered how she would manage without her parents' support. After the school session, Lovett was advised to return home. Returning home with her baby was the hardest thing Lovett had ever done. Her parents' reactions were as she had feared. Her father's face darkened with disappointment, and her mother broke down in tears. "How could you let this happen?" her father demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Lovett stood silently, clutching her baby to her chest. It took weeks of tense conversations and painful confessions for her parents to come to terms with the situation. Her mother, though initially heartbroken, began to soften, offering help with the baby. Her father remained distant, but over time, even he began to show small signs of forgiveness. Lovett realized that rebuilding her relationship with her parents would be a slow and difficult process, but she was determined to prove that she could rise above the challenges. Life as a single mother was a daily struggle. Lovett took on odd jobs during weekends and holidays to support her child while attending school. The stigma in her community persisted, with some neighbors offering judgmental glances and unsolicited advice. But Lovett focused on her daughter, who had become her source of strength and motivation. Despite the hardships, Lovett discovered an inner resilience she didn't know she had. She found ways to balance her responsibilities, slowly earning the respect of those around her. Her teachers, who had once doubted her ability to succeed, began to notice her determination and praised her efforts. After 1 year plus, Lovett graduated from school with better results than anyone had expected. On the graduation day, Chijioke publicly accepted the claim Lovett made about getting her pregnant. She forgave him and also secured a scholarship to a nearby university, where she pursued a degree in biology education. Her goal was to become a teacher, inspired by Mrs. Adelik's unwavering support. Over time, Lovett rebuilt her life. She found strength in her faith, her family, and the small community of women who had faced similar challenges. Her daughter grew into a bright and curious child, a reminder of how far Lovett had come. By the end of her journey, Lovett had not only healed from her past but had also found her purpose. She dedicated her life to helping young girls navigate the challenges she had once faced, ensuring that they had the knowledge and support she had been denied. Her story became a beacon of hope, proving that even in the face of adversity, resilience and determination could lead to a brighter future.